Hey guys, welcome back to Undead Design. This is Jerry. Today we're going to be installing extended tie rods to get more angle out of my G35 and talking about style. So let's go for a drive. I'm in my daily today, which is an 08 Subaru WRX. And I've got it tuned for E85, so it gets up and moves when it needs to. So Formula Drift is really unique because in the world of motorsports, as far as I know, it's the only judged sport. Everything else is either for time or whoever crosses the line first. So with it being a judged sport, it's kind of important to know the criteria. The main things that the judges are evaluating are line, the line that you're taking through turns and through the course, angle, how much angle you're putting into the car, which is what makes drifting, and then style. So how you go about doing it, and how stylish you look when you do it, all those kinds of things. And I think that angle plays a huge role in what your style looks like as a drifter. So when you think about that, the category of style is broken down into three parts. First is initiation, how quickly you get to angle, and then transitions, how quickly you move from one angle to the other through the course, and then the last part is commitment, how often you're on throttle and whether you have to make corrections and that kind of thing. And so style is a huge part of what makes drifting, and a huge part of style is getting to angle and transitioning between angles. So if you think about some of the drivers from Formula Drift, they all have a very different style. I mean, you look at Forrest Wang, and he really hangs the rear end of his car out there, and he's very stylish in the way that he drives. And then you think about James Dean the Machine, who's won the last 3 championships in a row. He is, like they say, a machine. He's so good at very consistently hitting his marks on the track and keeping a solid line and all those sorts of things. And then there's also, I mean, not even just driving style, but there's also just personality style. Like, look at Rad Dan Burkett with his, bright livery and his mullet and driving a Supra, and the only one who's doing that, and just, he's very stylistic in his approach to drifting. So there's a huge factor of it that's just very personal when it comes to driving. And I think that that's going to tie into our God thought at the end of the video. My biggest problem with drifting the G35 last year was spinning out, which is probably my fault. But one of the things I'm hoping to try and compensate for that with is an angle kit. So just trying to get more wheel angle so I can get a little more sideways and still maintain drift without spinning out. My initial plan was to get Tane extended tie rods and tie rod ends to get that extra drift. I'm tried and true method for years and years, and then Tane just discontinued their tie rod ends. Maybe they weren't selling enough of them, so I tried to find another brand. I am not rich enough to run SPLs. Just the tie rod ends themselves were like $230, so it was just too much for my blood. I ended up spending less than that on both the extended rods and the tie rod ends. So I got them from P2M, which is Phase 2 Motor Trend. And so check it out. Let's see here. So here's one of the tie rods. It looks pretty solid. It looks pretty stout. And this is the thing that makes all the difference in the world, is that you've got the spacer, which a lot of people on the internet will say, just go down to the hardware store, buy a spacer that fits, throw some red Loctite on there and done. But the thing about it is, one is throw the red Loctite on there, you won't be able to get it back off. If you have a tie rod bend or something at the track, you'd be in trouble trying to get it undone to replace it. And the reason that they throw the red Loctite on there is because by putting this on, you lose threads and you don't have enough threads to thread it in. But this has got extended threads, and that gives you still have the same amount of threading with the spacer, and so you can do it in a much more safe fashion and be able to change it at the track if you needed to. So here's the end. This looks pretty solid too. And it actually comes with this guy on here. So there we go. So that looks pretty good if you look at it. I think, of course, message me if I'm wrong, but I think that this spacer that they include is to adjust bump steer. So with the car lowered a little bit, that'll adjust the bump steer so you don't end up with bump steer when you're drifting. So anyways, I guess we'll see how these parts work out. We'll run them, and hopefully they run good, and hopefully they have some longevity, because I don't want to be replacing parts all the time. So, all right, so I'm going to start out by assembling these tie rods with the tie rod ends, and then we'll adjust them once we get the old ones out of the car, and kind of try and make them match as best I can so I can drive the car over to get an alignment done. This is hands down the most useful and noticeable mod that I did to my drift car. I struggled with spinning out, and then after adding angle to the front end, I'd get to the point where I was spinning out before and I'd go, oh man, I'm going to spin. And then I'd go, wait, I'm not spinning. This is awesome. And then I was able to hold drift longer, and yeah, it was an amazing change to the way that the car handled. So there we go. Here's our starting point. Now we got to pull the old ones out of the car. Alright, so getting this off is pretty basic. You can find plenty of videos on how to do that. So now I'm just going to hold the two up next to each other and try and get them as close to each other as I can, so that it doesn't drive funny on the way to get it aligned tomorrow. And yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Alright, it was only off by a couple of threads, so then I'm going to lock the nut so that it doesn't get twisted when I'm installing it, and I'm going to leave it there. It should work pretty good. After installing the extended tie rods, the next limiting factor is the wheel hitting the compression arm. According to my research, you can get away with just a 3mm spacer and still have enough threads to bolt on your wheel, but I decided to go with a thicker spacer and make sure there was zero interference. Alright guys, I wanted to show you the hub-centric wheel spacers that I got for the front up here. Basically, if you don't want to lengthen your studs, you can't really add much of a spacer here unless you go with a spacer that's at least as long, at least as wide as the studs, so you can cover them up and you can get the wheels over them. So on the G35, the studs are 1 inch, just like that. But I actually, kind of checking the fitment of the tire against the fender, I ended up going with about a 1 1/4. It's actually a 30mm spacer, and it seems like it fits pretty well. And the most important thing is that you make sure you get a hub-centric one. So if you look, you've got this ring here that fits into the back of the spacer here, and then it has another ring here so that the wheel will fit onto it, so that the pressure of the wheel's not on the lug nuts but on these rings, so that it stays secure. And so basically I'm just going to throw it on here with some Loctite, blue Loctite, not red Loctite. I take off and put on a lot of lug nuts during the course of this video, so I don't show them all to you, just for the sake of keeping you from the tedium. Remember to tighten the bolts in a cross star pattern, otherwise it'll end up uneven on the hub. Alright, so the torque specs on these things are different reports. So I've heard 80, I've heard 90, I've heard 100. 100 sounds good to me because I don't want them to come loose and I don't want to have to mess with them once they're on. So I'm going to start out by torquing them to 80, and then I'm going to turn up the torque wrench to 100 and then torque them to 100. Alright, so I have my long pry bar here that I'm going to lay in between the studs here so that I can torque this bolt down without it rotating on me. If you're curious about how these parts are holding up, I have now done 4 drift events and have driven on them for over a year, and I've had 0 problems with the spacers or the P2M tie rods and ends. I have turned the torque wrench up to 100, so go ahead and get started on doing all 5 again. Alright, so you can see how much improved the spacing is here. It's just about perfect. I thought I was going to have to roll the fenders, but it doesn't look like it. I mean, I suppose I could have gone with a bit more of a spacer, but I'm not really going for looks. I'm going for function, and to get the full lock out of the extended tie rods I've put on, I need to have a little bit of a spacer, otherwise it'll rub. After making space for the compression arm, the next contact point is the
tie rod end making contact with the lower control arm. The stock setup on the car has bolts that extend from the compression arms and hit a suspension stop, and that prevents you from binding up suspension components. So what I'm doing now is shortening that bolt so that the full lock is just a couple millimeters short of the tie rod end hitting the lower control arm. If you're interested in any of the parts for this mod, I will try to link them in the description below. Here you can see the added angle. The spacer throws off the view a little bit, and it doesn't look like much of a change, but I can tell you that on track it makes a huge difference.
Alright, the God thought of the day. When it comes to religion, there's very much a sense that people are only supposed to do things one way and it should be very cookie cutter. But that's kind of the problem with religion versus having a relationship with God, is that God is not cookie cutter and He doesn't make us to be cookie cutter. He wants to have a relationship with us. He's made each one of us unique and individual with different talents, gifts, skills, abilities, all those kinds of things. And so having a relationship with Jesus is personal. And that's the thing that's so cool about it. It makes me think about John chapter 21, when Jesus is having breakfast with his disciples on the seashore, and he's having a conversation with Peter, and he's actually sharing with Peter kind of what the end of his life is going to look like, and it is going to be a very challenging time for Peter. And when Peter hears that, his response is, well, what about John? And John's near them, and he kind of points at John and goes, well, what about John's life? What's John's life going to look like? And Jesus' answer is, you don't need to worry about John's life. You follow me. And that's how it is for each one of us. We need to have that one-on-one relationship, and we each have our own unique way to connect with God, our own talents and gifts and ways that we love Him and love other people. And so style is a huge part of it, just like style is a huge part of drifting. The two things are very similar. You can't try to copy somebody else's driving style. You have your own car, you have your own way of interacting with your car as an extension of your body, and your style is completely unique compared to somebody else's style. And it's the same thing with your relationship with God. Your style has to be totally, completely unique from everybody else's style. They can look similar, and you can see aspects of somebody else's driving or aspects of somebody else's spiritual life that you go, man, that's awesome, I'd like to grow in that area, but it's still got to be your own, and you have to embrace it in your own way. So, don't be afraid to be who God made you to be.
In the next episode, I'll be installing rear camber arms, and we'll talk about my first drift crash.
If you enjoyed the video, give me a like. If you're interested in what's coming up next, click subscribe, and I will catch you guys next time.